Hello, everyone, and welcome to You Thought You Knew, the podcast where we talk about a Survivor player that we think may be underappreciated, misunderstood, or just underrated. Each episode, we'll try to answer a question that's designed to make us challenge our preconceived notions about this contestant. Of course, there are no right answers. This is just a way for us to talk about our favorite show. My name's Nigel Bocanegra. I'm your co-host, and I am joined by my partner, Kevin McLain.
Yes, and I'm excited to be here and talk about this Survivor legend. So let's just gonna get into it and talk about Parvati Shallow. She was routinely labeled a flirt by fans, competitors, and Jeff Probst alike, but Parvati became one of Survivor's greatest contestants of all time. Upon her returns, she would take on labels like favorite, villain, and winner. But what is the best way to understand her overall legacy? How did Parvati turn a nondescript run in Cook Islands into becoming a four-time Survivor legend? Why do we call her a flirt when most of her allies tend to be women? And after her impressive runs in Micronesia and Heroes vs. Villains, she became Survivor's premier, shrewd, yet sexy young female strategist. And how has that affected the portrayal of female contestants that came after her? You thought you knew Parvati Shallow? Well, after 4 seasons, we hope we do. But we'll be talking about a lot of things Parvati and answering the question, was Parvati Shallow just the flirt?
Now, we have a treat for you because today we are joined not by one guest, but two. That is right. Today you'll be listening to two sets of duos. You know them from the Wrestling RHAP Up. Please welcome Mari Forth and Matt Scott. Matt and Mari, how are you?
Doing good. Glad to be back talking Survivor. Every time I talk Survivor, it seems to be with Matt. So I'm glad to have my wingman here. We're talking about the flirt. So I'm good. The flirt Parvati Shallow.
The alleged flirt Parvati Shallow. And it's good to be here. Great to talk about Parvati. Obviously, she's taken up a lot of our brain space as Survivor fans. So I think it's just about time that we dive in and talk about it.
You know, Mari, if you're always with Matt when you talk about Survivor, maybe you should consider playing as his loved one in, what is it going to be? Blood versus Water 3, right?
No spoilers.
No spoilers.
No spoilers. No, you could not pay me to play the game of Survivor. I have been very adamant about that. I will join him on a loved one's visit. I would come and visit for if he makes top 8 and be there for 2 seconds. Hopefully we can pick the same color rock out of a bag and get to spend time with each other.
Yeah, if I make top 8. Thanks a lot, Mari. It totally would work out. So much shade as we get started.
But I think because Mari introduced Matt as her, right hand person here. So I guess I want to clarify for everyone listening, which of you is the Parvati and which of you is the Amanda?
Oh, I'm definitely the Parvati because I'm the shady one. I'm the one who's going to call things out. I'm the sexy, seductive, but also smart one. And Mari's the really athletic one who does not have good acting skills at all.
But that's the funny thing, right? Because that's what the audience thought. But if you ask the people who were there on the jury, they thought Amanda was the bad one. They thought Amanda was the villain of all of that. So and they gave Parvati their vote. So yeah, either way, it works. I'm fine with that. I'll be the Amanda. I love Amanda.
Great.
You don't get to back-to-back tribals without being good.
So, Matt, let me ask you, the question today is based on whether or not Parvati is the flirt. Now, more generally, are you a fan of the flirt on Survivor?
Oh, I mean, well, okay. So part of me wants to say, look, I love a good flirt. Everyone loves a good flirt. Just bringing a little bit of fun, a little bit of the heat. But you know what? I also feel like the flirt is a dying art form on Survivor, especially in the edit, especially in terms of what we're given, especially compared with what it used to be. Parvati is a perfect example of this, and I want to talk about this a little today because Parvati was depicted as the flirt definitely in her first season, and I think over time, especially as we've seen the evolution of how women are depicted on television, we're just seeing less of these characters that are synthesized down to that one thing, especially with it just being something that's based on their sexuality. So fan of the flirt back in the day, but I just don't feel like that has as much of a place in Survivor today, or at least with what we've been getting and seeing. Plus, the players are so much different.
Mhm.
And yeah, I don't know. I can't think of the last consistent flirt or the last solid flirt on Survivor.
I can.
Uh-oh.
I think that we have seen a sharp decline in the flirt, like Matt said, because of Parvati. Because the absolute moment that a pretty girl on a beach is labeled a flirt or the next Parvati, they are viciously voted out. Like
I mean,
when we were talking about
yeah.
doing this podcast, and we were talking about, well, who's all been labeled the next Parvati? I
Yeah.
said go back and look at the first 2 or 3 vote outs, because more than likely, if it's a young white woman, she was voted out because she was flirting with somebody. And it makes me think of, I think the most successful recent flirt that I can think of is Figgy, for millennials and Gen X, because I think she made it pretty far, but then of course got chopped because of her relationship. And I think that's where modern survivor has evolved from, because we no longer see power couples as often as we did in early survivor seasons, because nobody wants to get run over by the next Robin Amber. Nobody wants to be played like Parvati. So I think this not just this archetype, but this way of playing the game has kind of narrowed so drastically because of how successful Parvati was over, three
Mhm.
and a half, 4 seasons, you
Yeah.
know.
I think you both raise really interesting points because, of course, look to Parvati blank point oh that we hear every
Mhm.
single time
Mhm.
there's a new cast announced, right? But I think it's interesting to consider what makes someone qualified to be Parvati 17.0 or whatever it's going to be. Because, is it because this woman is pretty, relatively young, confident, well spoken? There's a lot of different reasons we may identify that person as
Yeah.
the next theoretical Parvati. And it's even more interesting, I think, when you see people on the island be targeted precisely for those same characteristics.
Yeah. And I
Mhm.
think it's kind of incredible because that's what her legacy is, that you are a noun on a show. Like people are saying you
Mhm.
are 2.0, 3.0. I mean, there's only so many people that really get referenced in that way. I think Russell Hance, Boston Rob. I mean, these are legends and legends and legends. I mean, what I would do, to be, Susie Smith 4.0, like what I mean, it only really exists for those people. And, for a contestant that debuted, in season 13 in a show that's on its 43rd season, it's really, incredible that Parvati, who's now in her 40s, I believe,
Mhm.
is still like thought of as the young, sexy female contestant that's going to use her looks to her advantage. And I'm actually really
Mhm.
excited to dive into a lot of that today.
So we will go around the circle answering the question. Kevin, do you want to get us kicked off here? Do you think Parvati Shallow was just the flirt?
Mhm.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
I don't
Uh-oh.
think Parvati Shallow was just the flirt, but I think so many casuals thought she was the flirt. I mean, that's how she was
Mhm.
talked about so much. That's how production talked about her for so long. That even though in my gut, I feel like Parvati is so much more than a flirt, I feel like for the sake of this discussion, I will try to take a more critical lens on Parvati, because I feel like the fact that so many people see her as that way means there has to be a reason for that. And I don't want
Mhm.
to just kind of get swept up in the Parvati Shallow is a goddess and has never been wrong and like deserves to win every single season of all time. And I think there's merits to those arguments. I mean, she's so popular, but I think there has to be a reason why she's seen in that way. And I think it's more of a casual perspective. But one, I will try to put on my casual goggles on, my Facebook goggles on,
Yeah.
Oh.
for this podcast. Mari, what are your thoughts on is Parvati just the flirt?
I think it comes down to semantics. So when you say, was Parvati Shallow just the flirt? I'm going to say no, because there is way more things to her game that we can point out, because, being social and being a flirt can only get you so far if you don't have the smarts and strategic mind to back it up. Now, if you say, was Parvati Shallow a flirt? Hell yes. And she used that strategy across, again, at least 3 seasons. And going back, and me and Matt watched Cook Islands when we did our rewatch podcast. And I mean, honestly, she flirted with a lot of guys. I mostly what comes to mind is Nate. She really used her social flirting to get Nate on side so that he was voting with the Raro tribe, the white people tribe. And so and she also flirted with Adam, but of course Adam and Candace were hooking up, so she couldn't really do much there. But I think she really did kind of see what her flirting could do on Cook Islands, and then on Micronesia Fan versus Favorites, she turned the dial up because it worked, and it worked again in Micronesia because James. I'm starting to see a pattern here, but James. Hook, line, and sinker. He even said, "Oh, she's a flirt. She's not going to get me." But what happened? She did. She got you. She got you to take her very far before she clipped you. So I think it's okay to be labeled a flirt. Like I don't want to sit here and be like, no, and she deserves more, but because I feel like that's saying like being called a flirt is a bad thing. It's not that bad of a thing to be called a flirt, and I think that's what we should be redeeming, like the word flirt. It's okay to be a flirt on these reality TV shows because it can get you far. Now I'm gonna reference Big Brother because that's my judge, but like it's a difference between being a flirt and using that social capital to make strategic moves versus in Big Brother where we see a lot of showmances and flirts where a lot of the women on a lot of those sides do absolutely nothing and we call them furniture and then they get dragged. I think there's a big difference between that, and I think Parvati is the queen of flirting strategically.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, just to build on that, Mari, because I appreciate a lot of what you said there, and I do agree with the point. Parvati is not just the flirt. Like, Parvati is far from just the flirt. And yes, she brings the sexiness and the sex appeal and the giggles and the the thing that just makes guys like Nate and James and others kind of gravitate
And Russell
to it.
was following her around an island and
And
as she was trying to scurry away from
Ozzy
him.
and all. Yes, there's a whole long list, right? I always think of Yul and Ozzy, which is a funny combination, but Yul and
In the hot
Ozzy and
tub.
Parvati in the hot tub. Yes, vivid memories of that. And when I think of Parvati, that, like, to Mari's point, there is so much more to what she brings, right? But in my mind, beyond how she chose to show up in the game, I sort of feel like the whole flirt aspect of Parvati was created in some sense by the producers beginning with Cook Islands. Like, we got flirtatiousness out of Parvati, and that was part of her story. And I really love watching Parvati back on Cook Islands because it's easy to appreciate just how thoughtful and how much strategy goes into it. Harder on the first watch when you're just getting to know her and she's sort of in the background versus, in retrospect, seeing all that she put into that. But I also feel like in Cook Islands that the producers and the editors did not see her as more than the flirt. And so she was put out there as this flirt. And it actually kind of reminds me of Sarah Lucina to an extent, thinking of Cagayan, where she didn't come off as anything that notable. And so by the time that she returned the second time, it was that much easier for her to get further. I think similarly for Parvati, from Cook Islands to Micronesia, she didn't have a threat level to speak of, so she was able to navigate that much more. And then we saw she had less success after that, did pretty damn well for herself in Heroes versus Villains, but still had less success after that. And I really think it all, more than anything that Parvati did to start, has to do with how they chose to depict her, because I would imagine that she would have strategic thoughts of some sort to speak of in Cook Islands. We didn't get a lot of that. And if we would have gotten more of that, I think we possibly would have gotten less of Parvati the flirt going on, just because it wouldn't have been as effective because people would have seen through that. So not the flirt, but she's got more to her, but they really kind of pigeonholed her to that, and she played the role.
Yeah. And can I just say, not only did they pigeonhole her into the flirt role, but they also gave it, like, again, a villain aspect to being just a flirt, which I feel feels very misogynistic here. It's a flavor of misogyny, I feel like. But
Yeah,
Take it away.
a strong flavor. And I think this, if you're making that Sarah Lucina comparison here, I think the producers and editors could definitely learn a lot about how to tell women's stories a bit more.
Right.
I mean, clearly this is like I think a male lens that we see
Yeah.
Parvati kind of reduced down to. I mean, we were talking about all the
Exactly.
Parvati 2.0s. I think it's interesting is like what were the beta part, like original, like the Parvati 1.0s, or what is she the continuation of? Because I think if Mari, you're onto something about Parvati, her flirting is seen as almost a little bit more villainous or devious. And I think Julie Berry is almost in my opinion, the OG flirt in my eyes. And she is seen as like doing it for survival, like that she's swapped onto the men's tribe. And this is a way of her to like get through the game. So I think like we definitely see the flirt take off as an archetype. I think, post Rob and Amber, definitely post Parvati. So I think there's some interesting things.
I would also add like Jenna Maraska to that. I mean,
yes.
Jenna and Heidi. Like that was, I mean, the one thing you think of is them in the peanut butter and the cookies, and they played that. That was the trailer and all of the trailers. Like it was in all of the media. Can you believe they took their clothes off? So I would definitely say we definitely had a few flirts before Parvati.
Yeah. And so Nigel, I mean, so I think you need to answer the question yourself. Do you think Parvati Shallow was just the flirt?
Well, I will first acknowledge that, of course, this question is a little bit reductionist, but I think that I want to go against the grain and say yes, Parvati was just the flirt at a time. So, I think that Mari bringing up Sarah Lucina, I think is a really interesting person to compare her to, because I certainly see Parvati coming from Cook Islands into Micronesia as a Sarah Lucina, a Kelly Wentworth. I think someone that production in their first season, while they were out there filming on an island, production identified them as someone that they liked, that had a lot of potential, someone that they could really work with to build their show. But with how things eventually ended up, they didn't need to have the biggest edit or make them the most relevant character, but production knew that there was something special about them. And so you do see Parvati, Kelly Wentworth, and Sarah Lucina come back multiple times, because I think production did identify that they had a bit of a star in the making. But I think if you're looking at Cook Islands, I think Parvati was just the flirt. That will come down, at least for now, on that position. So moving forward here, for anybody who maybe has not seen all 4 iterations of Parvati, it's a lot of television that you need to have watched. Kevin, do you want to give people some quick hits, facts that they should be aware of as we discuss Parvati?
So some of the high level things, Parvati's played 4 times, going through her placements. Cook Islands, 6th place. Micronesia, winner. Heroes versus Villains, the runner up. And Winners at War, 15th place, voted out pre-merge. Some other trivia things that you'll find on her Survivor Wiki include being inducted into the Survivor Hall of Fame in 2010, one of the first inductees. She was the Survivor After Show host for 3 seasons as well. She was the first RHAP's Miss Survivor, and currently has the record for most days played by a woman in Survivor at 149 days. So now that we kind of covered a few of the most basic parts of Parvati, I think maybe we should talk about the fun part of Parvati. Like, what is everyone's favorite Parvati moment? Or what are some of the moments that come to your mind? Matt, what comes to your mind when you think of Parvati?
Oh my gosh. Well, not a favorite moment, but definitely one that is a little bit outside the box. Not in a particular moment, but Cook Islands, nobody could pronounce her name properly. Like nobody could pronounce it. And I just think that is hilarious in retrospect, with the benefit of hindsight, where, she's the first name that people think of. We talked about Parvati 2.0 and the many Parvati 2.0s. If we would have taken the time and sorted through a bunch of cast bios, we would have seen her name come up time and time again. So for me, it's all of the ways that people mess up her name. Poverty being one of my favorites. Love Poverty. And I just appreciate how like back to her lore and what's set up, she's so under the radar that people can't even say her name properly. And to me, that is just one of the most fascinating parts of Parvati. Not a maybe a fun moment in retrospect, because they did ultimately get it right after more than one season and her establishing her legacy. But that jumps out to me. Though, some people might name like her double idol play and the like, but I'm going a different route here.
Matt, I think it's in Cook Islands when they're doing the swap and they have a team pick 'em. Somebody picks Parvati and says her name wrong after they've been out there.
And by the way, that was a fan of the Survivor.
Yeah.
Right? Like someone on the fans tribe did not know her name, and she was brought in as one of the 10 biggest favorites of all time. And I think we'll dive into that a bit more. But Mari, what is the Parvati moment that comes to your mind?
Is this kosher? Like, no. No. Love the opening line. Talking about they split everybody into race. But I it's hard to pick a moment because Micronesia is one of my favorite seasons.
Yep.
I've talked about it, and one of the moments that I do love the best is her, Suri, and Amanda out on the boat, like strategizing. That moment always gives me chills because I'm like, yes, queens, yes, pick these men off one by one. I just loved everything with like the three of them, and I always yell like Suri was robbed because like why was that not a final three? But anyways, I love Micronesia because she really learned from Cook Islands, because when the swap happened and her and James are almost on the bottom, she was like, I need to do something, and she actually did something instead of waiting and being reactive like she did on Cook Islands. So flipping Natalie and Alexis and bringing them onto her side was just genius. And then like watching her face when like the tribes merged, and Amanda was like, but what if I don't want to like play with them? And she's like, oh shit. But I think Parvati has so many really, really good moments in Micronesia. But yeah, I just love the image of her and Amanda and Suri on the boat talking about how they know they can't beat James, they know they can't beat Ozzy, and basically forming the Black Widows right then and there.
Yeah.
Mari, I think it's interesting that you're bringing up some of her competitors that she played against in Micro, James, Amanda, Ozzy, Suri. I think something that really helps Parvati's legacy is that she's always associated with other players that are super high name ID, players that we're all very familiar with or adore. In Cook Islands, she's with Yule, Ozzy, Candace, maybe not everyone's favorite, but a big name by the time she's there in Blood versus Water. But she comes back in Heroes versus Villains. She's with Sandra, Jerry, Russell. In Winners at War, she's with some of the best, right? Parvati's relationships are with people that we are very, very familiar with. And I think that has to at least in some way contribute to part of how big of a character I think she really is in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, and she's very relationship based. I don't think she thinks about Survivor in like the numbers way that some people do. Like, I don't think she thinks about voting blocks. She's very strategic and she's very smart. But if flirting is fundamental to who she is as a person, well, she's thinking about who does she have good vibes with, who does she connect with, she has chemistry with, and I think that's what makes her really add a little extra to all of her seasons, because she brings out things in people around her, whether that be romance or distaste or frustration. There's just so much. I mean, the Parvati moment that's coming to my mind is when she really won me over, was when she is reading the JT letter. And I can't, it cuts to them and it's her kind of like belly laughing and making fun of it and kind of like adding her own ad libs. And it's like, oh, she's my favorite mean girl of all time. And she's being targeted. It's like, it's kind of like she's like living in her own villainy in a way. Cause I don't think Parvati thought of herself as a villain going to Heroes versus Villains. But by that moment, she was like, maybe they do have a reason to be threatened by me. And it's kind of fun. Parvati's a fun person. And I think she's having a lot of fun in that time as well. So Nigel, what do you think?
So, to quickly comment on what you said, Kev, I think what's a lot of fun about Parvati is that she's very cheeky. And I think she's really willing to lean in if she's going to be a villain, okay, she can be a little villainous. She can make it fun. You know, I think she's a little bit more of a theatrical type of villain than someone
Right.
who's just a little
Mhm.
kind of negative and you're not really enjoying it. I think
Mhm.
my favorite Parvati moment is coming into Winners at War. We're hearing about all of these players that we have not seen on our screen in years. And you know, many of the women in particular, I think, were young women when they were first on the show and were coming back as moms, people who are closer
Mhm.
to their middle age. And I think that, you know, in our culture, becoming a mom is maybe a thing that really changes how the rest of the world sees you, much more than
Mhm.
becoming a dad. We
Mhm.
associate moms with being a very specific way, and dads can be, I think, a little bit more detached from their identity as a dad. So seeing Parvati on that list, knowing that she's now married, has a kid, I'm excited to see what does this different version of Parvati have in store for us. And then in the premiere, she's walking in the woods alone with Boston Rob, saying, Boston Rob, are you going to ask me to prom? And it's just, it's so fun to see, like, oh, it's the same Parvati deep down, you know, and the way
Mhm.
that we
Yeah.
know her already, which I think was just a really fun surprise for me
Mhm.
coming into Winners at War. So now that we've kind of gone over what some of our top moments are with her, Matt and Mari, I'm interested in learning a little bit more about what your history was, just with like learning about Parvati. Mari, did you watch Cook Islands live?
I did. Famously, I said Cook Islands was the first live Survivor season I watched. I I knew about it before that. I didn't watch until before Cook Islands premiered. I rewatched all of the seasons up until that on like the outdoor channel when they used to just play that back to back. So Cook Islands was actually the first I think it was Cook Islands. It's either that or Fiji. I can't remember. But either way, I watched it live. Which one came first?
Yeah.
Cook
So
Islands came
Cook
first.
Islands. So
That's
were
what I
you
thought. Just making sure.
Uh-huh.
You know,
n-
I'm a little rusty on the numbers.
so you
Mhm.
meet Parvati the first time. Were you enamored by her, or was she just like one of the white girls on the wrong side of the divide?
So, I mean, again, and that was another reason too. I was like, oh my God, they're about to separate this by race. So of course I loved watching it. I'm thinking back because I mean I was very, very young when that happened, when that season took place. So still in like high school, I want to say. What does anybody got the year for when that? Yes, around high school.
2006
Anyways,
ish. Yeah.
there it is, right. So, I just I don't really remember her like that. I remember Yule. Like when I think about that season, the first person I think of is Yule. You know what I'm saying? That it felt like his season. I remember rooting for the I-2-4. So I don't particularly remember having much fondness for her because I was definitely rooting for the underdogs.
And do you remember how Micronesia, when she's in Micronesia, when did you kind of become a fan of hers, or how was that experience?
So Micronesia, I did not watch live. Uh, I don't know what year that was, but I was like an adult now. So
Yeah.
I might have been in college. So, but when I went back and watched Micronesia, I was like, this is great. You know, her again. Nigel said, it's about the company she kept. You know, the Black Widow Brigade, rooting for all of those women. I was like, yes, Queen's work. So she was definitely top of mind on Micronesia. Again, well, I that is one of the seasons that I've gone back and watched multiple times, and I rarely do that for Survivor seasons.
Okay. And Matt, was that a similar trajectory for you as well? Were you kind of like Parvati's a no one, and then I started liking her by micro? What's your journey like?
Look, Mari and I are like twins with Survivor because I started watching during Cook Islands probably like 13 years old. I was like, oh, there's a race war, sign me up.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I was tuning in, and like
Right.
that for whatever reason, like that's actually one of my favorite seasons, definitely in retrospect, maybe
Yeah.
my favorite,
Mhm.
for all the characters it introduced us to. But Parvati didn't stand out, and I think a huge part of that, especially thinking of reality TV and the landscape at the time, which I was consuming ad nauseum, was the fact that we had so many characters who were the flirts, the
Yes.
women who were the flirts in those archetypes. So she did not jump out, because if you think of the reality TV landscape and any of the shows that were on, and I could go down the list, but I won't even start. Like, you always had the flirt character, like the normally pretty white woman who was the flirty character, and that's what she was summed up as. So she didn't jump out then. And then by Micronesia, where we had the most fascinating dynamic, at least at the time, to me as a fan, where it's like, oh, we have these brand new people. I was naive. I thought that the fans had a chance. But when we see them getting picked off, and we see some fun dynamics with some of the fans, and then, we see some of the favorites. Like, I loved James, and to see him getting bamboozled, that's when I started to wake up to Parvati in particular. Amanda was also at that time, or by that point, one of my favorites.
Yep.
And I would have been more in Camp Amanda. So I feel like I was a
Mhm.
little bummed that she didn't win. But you know what? I've gotten over that a little bit. I hope Amanda's gotten over it too.
Well,
not.
for me, I started, I was a day one fan from Borneo. So I had to kind of follow the trajectory of the show. So in Cook Islands, much like the two of you, I said, race war, I'm in. Yes, it was so exciting. And I didn't understand the whole problem with it. And that's, as someone who's Asian American, it was really exciting to see 5 Asian people on Survivor. I was like, this
Exactly.
is
Yes.
crazy, And then 2 of them made it to the end. And you could definitely tell I was a young person who did not have a lot of, I think, deep Survivor opinions at the time. I must have been like 12 or 14 or so.
Yeah.
And because I was a Becky truther, I said Becky deserves to win more than anyone. And
That's right.
that is a laughable opinion now.
Mm.
And so Parvati, I think I liked her a bit, actually. I think she's actually one of the more rootable Raro members overall. But I did like the fact that when she slays like JP in the pre-merge, it's like her first victim. And we kind of see that a little bit of taste of Parvati. By the time Micronesia came around, I remember not liking Parvati and that fact that she had returned, because I thought, this is one of 10 favorites. Parvati, what? Like, PG's not here, Twyla's not here. You have even people who decline, like Courtney and Candace. I mean, Katie Gallagher. I mean, now that by the time Micronesia's, I'm like a teen, and so I really want really these big mouthy characters, because even Parvati wasn't like a big of a personality her first time. So I was not a big Parvati person. She was kind of mean to Eliza, so I wasn't really rooting for her. But I loved the Black Widow Brigade, and by the time Suri was unfairly booted at the final 3, I immediately became a Parvati stan, because I think I just saw that she was so much more integral. Like, Amanda doesn't vote Aussie out, but Parvati does, and I loved the Aussie boot because it was so exciting. So I really had turned around on Parvati, but I did always feel like her win was a fluke, kind of, just because of the twist at the end. And it was heroes versus villains that made me become a real fan of Parvati as a person and really see the complexity of Parvati. And then I've kind of just loved her ever since. And Winners of War is very exciting and disappointing to see her kind of go a bit early. But I'm definitely a Parvati fan, but I remember being very much scolded for being excited for Parvati, because Parvati was not that popular with audiences in Micronesia. The Black Widow Brigade is loved now, but I think at the time, why would we be rooting against the alliance that contains Ozzy and James, of all people? We would be rooting for the women's alliance. I think that started happening because they were just so effective.
Kevin, can you explain what you mean by you were scolded for liking Parvati?
Oh, I was scolded by my mom when Parvati, the last vote is revealed for Parvati. It was such a, Eliza with the whole melodrama of it all, casting her vote. And when it turned out to be Parvati, go, oh, this is great. Like a strong female strategist. She's like mouthy. She tells men to deal with it. It's so exciting. And mom was like, no, you do not get excited for her. She's a bad role model, in the way that Ozzy talks about Parvati being a bad role model, even in his jury speech. That was, I think, the perception of a young woman in charge of her sexuality. You're not supposed to like that. And I'm like, I'm a gay man. I love that. This is the best thing ever. So I really had come around on Parvati a lot then, but I do remember the casual opinion at the time was not super pro Parvati. I remember when Micronesia was announced and they went through the list of contestants that in a Reality News online article referred to her as Parvati, and then in quotations, most aptly last name ever, Shallow. is
Ooh.
also on this cast. So I think there was actually Parvati was much more negative
Jeez.
at the time.
I mean, her biggest singular moment, I think, coming out of Cook Islands is getting naked in a hot tub with Yule and Ozzy. I feel like that was giving, haters some easy material to work with.
What's wrong with being in a hot tub and taking your clothes off with Parvati and Yule and Ozzy? Like, wouldn't you, if you were in the same situation, you probably would have done the same thing. I'm just saying, the haters
Listen,
are haters.
Same.
Ozzy has been in a lot of those situations, pre-Survivor,
Post-Survivor.
and interesting, it's, Parvati's the one we frame that around. But Nigel, you obviously are a newer fan. You didn't start until Cagayan, so you probably heard about Parvati before you even watched her seasons. What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, so I quickly got into Survivor after seeing it. After Cagayan aired, I just started binging what I could get my hands on. I would go to the subreddit and look at recommendations. So I actually saw Heroes versus Villains Parvati before any of the others.
Oh, wow.
Which is definitely an interesting way to see her story unfold, because I think it is like hands down her best outing as far as like the character, the experience, the attention that she gets on the show. She has like so many exciting moments. Then I watched a micro where she wins, but I was aware that she was going to win, and I was pre-devastated that Suri was not going to win, right? So it was interesting knowing that it was coming and kind of like accepting that Parvati was the winner, and like this makes sense, seeing how it all ended up playing out. But certainly along the way, because I didn't know the exact details, along the way, I wasn't totally clear as to why Parvati was going to win that season. So I thought that was interesting. Then I get to Cook Islands, where I was like, that was where we started. This is the Parvati that we're going to end up with. So I just thought it was interesting that my viewing of her gets like quieter, I think, with every single outing, because by the time you're at Winners at War, my last time with her, she's a pre-merger. Right. But I think that allowed me to get quickly on board with Parvati from the very get-go and say like, oh yeah, it was so exciting. The double idol play, as you said, I'm a big fan of Sandra. So getting to see her with Sandra, talking crap about Russell, throwing his hat in a fire. I mean, that's just like incredible. And Matt, to your point, I then get to Cook Islands and I was like, well, the hot tub, I kind of understand how she comes back. It's like a moment that the show can like easily market and just like put a spin on and say like, oh, this is like the archetype that we have for Parvati. She was the flirt. She got into a hot tub with Ozzy and Yule, almost in the way that you can point to Eric in a very easily packaged, oh yeah, he was the fool. He gave up his immunity, and you can just show a little clip. I think you can do the same thing for Parvati and Cook Islands as like an easily explainable as to why she's there kind of moment.
Yeah. And I know this doesn't like really fit in, but I have to say it. I think the reason why a lot of us connected with wanting to watch Cook Islands, immediately seeing that it was a race war, is as minorities ourselves, we did not see it as a race war. We saw it as, oh, finally the playing field is leveled. Like, what I'm saying? Like, there's gonna be actually like more people of color on this season. So I love putting that out on our Cook Islands podcast. But it's true. It really was one of those things that pulled me into the world and got me like into it, because I was like, yes, finally a chance. Like,
Mara, you're totally right, because I had the same view coming into Cook Islands. I was like, a full team of Latinos, like, hell yeah, I can get on board. And then very quickly, Ozzy's throwing challenges and Billy Garcia is having some problems, and I was like, oh no. Oh, I should not have gotten so excited.
Yeah. And the race thing was super exciting. And that's why I think it's so funny to think about Parvati, is that so many new fans in particular, hear about Parvati, right? And they just see the name. They know that she apparently is a fierce survivor, icon, legend, mastermind. And then sometimes the first season they watch in the Parvati Discord, like season appearances, is Cook Islands. And they're like, what do you mean the woman's name who's Parvati, which is a Hindu name, is on the white tribe and the alliance we're not rooting for? Like, none of this makes sense. And I think it was important for you to mention that, Mari, because that's why we were all really drawn to it. And it was interesting, I think, how production felt about Cook Islands as well, because they pull a lot of the white contestants from that cast, even though they make up a disproportionate, like a very small number of the overall castaways. But it's just so interesting kind of reflect back. But I want to justice for Becky. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Jenny, where's Jenny? Like, bring him back. Like,
You
what?
thought you knew the Puka Puka tribe needs to be one of our next ones that we do in the future. But I
Yeah.
want to hone in and talk about kind of how Parvati is perceived today. We've touched a little bit about that. Nigel, did you have any like immediate reactions thinking about who Parvati is today?
So I think this episode is going to air on Tuesday, January 17th, which means that we will be just a week post the Parvati Sandra Twitter feed, unless it's like
Oh,
still
yeah.
going at the time, right? And to not delve into the content of what they're feuding about online, I think the point to make here is that we are 13 years almost past the premiere of Heroes versus Villains, and you have people lining up on either side of this argument to argue in support of their fave, one of those being Parvati. And I think it's truly incredible that you can have somebody all these years later still elicit that kind of response from the fan base.
Yeah, I agree. Matt, do you have any reactions to how fans are feeling about how they're talking about Parvati in general today?
Yeah, you know what? I think that it's easy to look back. Like hindsight's always 2020, and oh no, not to bring up 2020. What a year. But you know, hindsight is 2020, and it's interesting that Parvati is not only so well regarded, but I feel like she is the cool pick. Like if you want to, like, oh, I'm gonna play like a good player, it's Parvati. Whether or not you fully understand the mechanics of how she approached things, I think that the understanding of Parvati, whether it's as a flirt and a strategist or whatever it is still reductive for what she is. Because I do feel that one thing that Parvati does so well is that she works to build these bonds in her game. Like it's not the present day game of we need to get the numbers, I'm counting numbers all along the way. It's like, let me build that bond, that flirtatious bond with you. And then when the time comes, kind of like the Black Widow thing, like then she strikes and she gets in people's ears. And I just don't know if like as much as people pump up Parvati, I don't see them breaking down her moves as being like the most iconic moves. I feel like the fandom is for her overall, as opposed to like, here is what Parvati did to win. So in other words, I don't think that there are people who are looking at Parvati's game and saying, I need to do these specific things in today's game. Maybe in part because, as we've discussed earlier, the flirt strategy and approach maybe doesn't work as well because it triggers some alarm bells for people nowadays because of Parvati. But yeah, it's interesting that people don't really point to specific things in their game that influence how they need to play. It's more like the overall legend of Parvati that people fall in love with. And I think it helps that she is like the hot flirt, even though that's not all that she is.
Yeah.
You know, I like that you pointed out that Parvati is like the cool pick, as you said,
Yeah.
Matt, because you know, in all of the bios that we get for the cast that drop every season, you'll have a couple people that mention Parvati, and I have to feel like some of the reason they're saying that is because they're trying to angle a good edit for themselves, right? They're like, you want to be like Parvati because Parvati's a big character. She's successful. She's really fun. When you're saying that I'm the Parvati, I don't think people are just saying that they'll be the flirt or the, you know, the strategist younger woman. But I think it's more about like, I'm going to be a breakout of the season. I am the Parvati. What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah.
I mean, I think you have that in the way that it's so interesting because if I met a Survivor fan in public and I said Parvati was their favorite, I'd be really excited to talk to them, right? Like that's like a good sign. Now, when Nigel and I were traveling in Ecuador, we found Survivor fans, but their favorites were Joe Anglim. So,
and it's like, oh, we don't have anything to talk about, do we?
We're like, we don't watch the same show.
We need
to. So I guess we're not really able to dive into any of this, truly. But I think, yeah, if someone said Parvati, that'd be very exciting. Though I do think Parvati being mentioned in cast bios tends to be a bit of a more of a negative because it's like you're going with a really high profile choice. It's kind of akin to when the casual, like more casual fans say Boston Rob at this point. Perhaps like if you're going to give, like there's so many strong young female strategists in the show that'd be really fun to see one of those names be put out there. And so I always really love it when you hear someone make a more obscure pick, I guess. I want to make sure we get into some of the data that I found on
Ooh.
Parvati's
Please.
reputation as perceived today. I found a popularity poll on Reddit from 2016 where the users just scored each of the contestants, each of their own individual iterations. So Parvati was ranked 3 times because Winners at War had not happened yet. On a scale of 1 to 10, that was all aggregated and ranked all the way down to the number 1 favorite. So 575 contestants were ranked.
Okay.
I want to ask the 3 of you here.
No.
What do you think was the least popular? Like, what was the order? The most popular to the least popular Parvati season. You can all talk it out, but I want Mari to be the team captain here and lock in the final answer, though.
We love that for Mari.
Yeah, we love that for me. I think we all agree that Cook Islands has to be like the least score here. But
Hands
what do
down.
we feel about Micronesia versus Heroes versus Villains? Because me personally, I liked Micronesia Parvati, or Micronesia Parvati is more memorable to me than Heroes versus Villains. Again, personally. But what do you guys think? I think Nigel said he's a fan of Heroes versus Villains Parvati.
Well,
Yeah.
and like I'm curious to dive into that, but the other aspect I want to just throw out there is that I'm thinking of Micronesia. I'm thinking of Suri. I don't know if people are rating that lower because Suri didn't win because of the love for her. Heroes versus Villains is an interesting case. Also, just because Parvati is I mean, I feel like she's completely different, or just gets so much more snarky and sassy in Heroes versus Villains, and doesn't end up winning. And I don't know if I don't think though that the Heroes versus Villains loss makes Parvati look any worse in the view of the fans. And I am thinking about that Micronesia thing with Suri. Like, I do feel like some people might be bitter. So I would put Cook Islands at the bottom, then Micronesia next. But as much as I love it, as amazing as the Black Widow Brigade is, and then Heroes versus Villains above that, even though I know some people maybe in the cast might disagree with that being Parvati's best at the time.
Yeah,
Nigel?
I think that I'm going to agree with your ranking, Matt, because I think I'm a little lower on Micro than many fans are, just because of the order that I watch seasons. If you had been watching live or semi-live, going season to season, Micro is so exciting because of how revolutionary a lot of the strategy is, some really big moves that are flashy. And Heroes versus Villains, I think, is certainly building off of that just a couple years later. But Micro was much later in my rewatch, so I really enjoyed it, but I think I had seen many more exciting gameplay at that point. So, my gut reaction is also Heroes versus Villains above Micro, but I think the thing is that she wins Micro. So I feel like that could be a big reason why people would rate that version of her as the top one.
Yeah.
So Mari, just like in Family Feud, you've heard all the answers, but you get to decide what do you think the Reddit users in 2016, what do you think was number 1, 2, and 3 on Parvati seasons?
I'll go with my teammates because I am a magnanimous queen. I'll go with number 1 is Hero and Villains, 2 is Micronesia, 3 is Cook Islands. Even though I don't believe that, but it's cool.
Right.
Okay. All right. The lowest ranked Parvati is Cook Islands Parvati.
Wow.
Surprising everyone.
Surprise.
Yep.
But I think she's ranked exceptionally high for someone who is a little bit more of a non-factor in that season, ranked 117th overall. She's ranked 7th. I'm sorry, 4th out of the 20 contestants overall in Cook Islands.
Wow.
In Cook Islands?
In Cook Islands, 4th out of 20.
Justice for Becky. Come on.
Justice for Becky, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the most important thing here is that they actually gave us some information about the demographics that tended to rank people more significantly higher or lower, right?
I'm curious.
This is the 538 of RHAP, guys. Okay. So, and the most favorable demographic to Cook Islands Parvati were people who had been part of the Survivor subreddit for less than a year. So I think that tells you it's people who watched Parvati or were more familiar with Parvati, maybe knowing who she was from her other seasons and kind of projecting that a little upon. And I think maybe Matt mentioned this earlier. There is something kind of fun about seeing Parvati knowing that she's capable of greatness and kind of filling in the blanks, but she is ranked very high
Her
here.
first Pokemon evolution, if you will.
Yes. The baby Parvati. The next one, actually,
Wait, Kevin, before you go forward, can you please tell us who the other people ranked above her are in Cook Islands? Because I'm a little afraid of who that cast is.
You'll Ozzy Penner.
I believe so.
Calling your shot.
I don't have that printed on my little like sheet right now, but I will make sure to tweet that answer after this is released.
Ooh, a
So-
tease. We
Yeah,
love it.
tease. Don't you want to know? So I'll figure that out. But I believe it's those three. So Parvati, not even, or most likely, not even the best white person from that season. I think that like maybe that tells us something. But she's still so popular. Her next highest was actually Heroes versus Villains.
Who called that?
Mari's intuition was right.
But she went with us, Mari.
I
do
did.
Not,
I did.
Do not
Just to
listen
prove
me
you
and
guys were
Matt.
on my
dare
track.
Don't listen to us.
Heroes versus Villains Parvati was ranked number 28 out of over 500 contestants, so exceptionally high. Matt, do you think, is that a surprising number? Do you feel like that should be higher or lower? Is Parvati 28th at this point for you in like 2016, you think?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting to me is that Micronesia's higher, and the only reason I would have thought people would put it lower is fans versus favorites. Half the cast doesn't know what they're doing. Spoiler alert. So that's a fascinating part for me. But you know, I get it. I mean, Heroes versus Villains, fun season. I loved it. I would have put her higher, but I mean, they're not me. That was Reddit in 2016. I don't know what they were thinking.
Yeah. Well, Heroes versus Villains Parvati was ranked number 28. And I think maybe the thing I want to highlight about this is that her least favorite demographic, also the same in Cook Islands, were users that were in a relationship or married. So I think people who were more single were more likely to like her, and probably the way that flirting is kind of being presented to us. But her most favorable demographic in Heroes versus Villains were gay and bi users.
Shocker.
Oh, wow.
The girls and the gays strike again.
Yes, absolutely. So,
Damn.
I mean, and it was very important because after Heroes versus Villains Parvati, we entered the Dark Ages, which was not for the girls and the gays by any stretch of the imagination. Which means that Parvati Micronesia was the highest ranked Parvati. So we know that Heroes versus Villains Parvati is number 28. So Mari, since you were right after all, deep down, where do you think Micronesia Parvati, what number do you think she ranked if she's above number 28?
I think she has to be top 10. I think so.
Number one.
Not number one. She's not number one. Number one is always either going to be Boston Rob or Tony because misogyny.
Yes, man.
I would say number 6. Something about number 6
Wow.
is calling me.
You're saying number 6. The correct answer is number 22.
Oh,
Wow. That's
So,
a little lower
I mean,
than I would have thought.
Mari, I was gonna say misogyny is pretty powerful. Number 6
yeah, I
is
should have thought.
ambitious. There are a lot of men.
I
A
should have
lot of
thought.
men.
There are. Yeah.
And I think collectively, Parvati might be the 6th most like as a career sum, but I think her individual like outings.
Oh, for Micronesia.
You know,
that makes
she's still in the top 30. I mean, it's still very impressive. She has strong positive correlation. So people that rated Parvati highly also tended to rate these people highly. And I think you're going to notice a theme of cutthroat women here in Natalie Bolton,
Okay.
Gabon Corinne Kaplan, and Cambodia
Wait, what?
Sierra Easton. So, so people who, if you ranked those contestants low, you likely ranked Micro Parvati low, and if you rank those contestants high, you're also likely to rank Parvati high with that.
That's unfortunate.
She had
Well,
negative correlations with men who don't have a reputation for being strategic, which is Keith Famey from Australian Outback, Russell Swan from Philippines, and Brandon Bellinger from Guatemala. And I think the other thing I want to mention here is that she got a huge boost by voters with a 4-year college degree. So if you have a college degree, it's like politics, right? Education is something that divides us all. You were far more likely to be higher on Micronesia Parvati. So,
yeah.
Matt, any reactions to this? Was this surprising to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay. So it's not surprising to me, and I'm annoyed. Justice for Parvati now. Move over, Becky. Parvati takes the spot because at the end of the day, like it is kind of frustrating to see people so like everything. What you said about Corinne, Sierra Easton was enough for me to be like, okay, well, I get the correlation there. It's unfortunate that people associate these archetypes, and of course gender is a factor in that, with one another, as opposed to just looking at her as a player. I don't know. I think of our dear compatriot Stephen Fishback, who says that ranking is arbitrary and reductive, and I completely agree, because Parvati deserves better here. 22 feels low. It even feels low from the perspective of what we know her legacy to be and how we see her talked about. I mean, I would be really curious, and I guess I'll take a look at that list, but to see where, like, what other women are above her and how many men are in this top 21, because there can't be, I mean, it's probably packed with men who don't deserve it.
Probably packed with men who didn't win as well. I would bet your bottom dollar
Oh,
is packed with
100%.
men who didn't win.
And I do believe, though I will also tweet this, so make sure to follow me on Twitter, I think Suri might be the number 1 or 2 person overall. So like, it is interesting that because I think Suri's like universally praised in a way by casuals and favorites and like and super fans alike, where I think Parvati certainly had a lot of more casual haters from a time. But I think that I think that would is something we can cover kind of like when we reflect on historical legacy. But since I didn't have her winners at war popularity data, just because it had not happened by the time that poll was taken, Nigel, I want to ask you, out of the winners at war cast, the Survivor subreddit also did like a popularity ranking. Where do you think Parvati ranked going into winners at war amongst her fellow people?
Out of her cast,
out of the winners at war cast.
So I think that's going to be a little tough, because if this was, let's say, Heroes versus Villains 2 and it was non-winners, I think that Parvati would probably be ranked much more highly. But because she's up against other winners specifically, I think that there are probably people who will say that they like Parvati, but were more impressed with somebody else's game who they also really like. She's going up against some of the truest legends of the show. That being said, though, I think she's still got to be like number 6, maybe. At least.
You think number 6?
I think that like Boston Rob could totally be above her. I think that someone like Ethan Zahn, who's been a fan favorite for a really long time, people knew a lot about his like personal journey. I think that there's some people who could sneak their way above, but I think that she's not going to be lower than number 6.
Okay, she is higher than number 6, and Ethan was number 3. So with this information, Mari, where do you think Parvati is then? If Ethan's number 3 and higher than number 6, can you guess the correct, seated position of how excited people are to see Parvati?
Because there are 20 winners, right?
There were 20 winners. She's at least top 5, and she's not number 3. And Matt
okay.
Yeah, so and Matt will go in for the steal if you get this wrong.
Okay.
I hope you get it wrong. Get it wrong.
Get it wrong. Not number 3. Number 4, then.
You think number 4? She is higher than number 4. Matt Scott, what number do you think it's 1 or 2?
I'm stressed. I'm not good with this decisions like this. And honestly, like looking at the cast, thinking of who's there, and then also thinking of the season and just the narrative. I mean, Boston Rob, I think, had to be number 1. But then there's Parvati. But Boston Rob, is he too obvious? I'm gonna go with number 1 because I believe in Parvati.
And this was the preseason assessment going into who are the people most excited by, and the number 1 person was Parvati Shallow.
Wow. Good
win. Just knowing that you got this correct. That's all it is. And
you got this correct.
And I think it's notable because I think, Rob and Sandra, were very popular, but we just saw them on 39, so going into 40, I think there's a lot of excitement. We get to see Parvati. I mean, Parvati was probably one of the, when you heard there's winners at war, and if Parvati was not called, I think most of us would be horrified. She's one of the biggest gets at the time. And there was just a lot of excitement to see her 10 years, after her season. So she was number 1. Number 2 was Yule, number 3 being Ethan. So I think that gives us some indication about how Parvati is seen today, which is that she's exceptionally popular. especially with the super fans, even if in 2016 she was not top 10 for any of her individual appearances. I think she's just very, very popular.
That feels like years of people being compared to her, hyping up her legacy almost. Yeah.
I definitely see that. But I want to now go back to how was Parvati perceived then. I did some scouring, some searching on the internet, and found some headlines about Parvati after her boot episode.
Oh my God.
Which boot?
Receipts.
Cook Island's boot episode. So what was being said? Now, this was on Sir Links-a-Lot, which had all these little different links. All of them were dead, I think, because I think a lot of these sites no longer exist
Wow.
because they're from 2006. But the headlines were still there, and I thought this was interesting. Headlines around Parvati's boot episode, if you want to get an idea of how commentators were discussing Parvati. All right. TV Robot wrote, Survivor Parvati's sex appeal lets her down. Reality TV Calendar's headline, Parvati gets naked and goes home.
No.
Oh God.
Jam says flirting naked couldn't save Survivor. So
you know, we can't access the actual articles, as Kevin said, but like, this would not be
Yikes.
headlines I would want to be reading about myself.
Oh my gosh. No, they sound like something that Corinne Kaplan would have written at the, notoriously at the time. So you know what? It's rough and it's hard. And I think the thing that I at least appreciate, and I hope that we can appreciate in retrospect, is like there was definitely a different view of women like Parvati. Actually, probably I would imagine every time she played, like the role of women in reality TV and what they could be in TV and media in general has evolved. Those headlines are cringe. I hope that the people who wrote those regret that. I would imagine that they do at this point, but it speaks to where we were as a culture, which I think has everything to do with how Parvati's been perceived and her trajectory and her success over the course of her Survivor tenure.
Yeah, and I think that's why she's so popular. I mean, she went from someone that people disliked a bit or probably really pigeonholed, and I think production as well pigeonholing her, and then seeing her that she's so much more complex than that. But Mari, I cut you off if you want to go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, and it goes back to what we were saying about that hot tub, the hot tub scene being so ingrained in people's minds that it was enough to bring her back, basically.
Yeah, it is. It's just very interesting to kind of think about that.
You know, I do think that something that is probably also tied to the increase in popularity that Parvati gets over time is the fact that her story starts with her as, you know, someone that clearly writers at the time are referring to, like the girl who got naked in the hot tub, but she ends up coming back and is the winner of the season, where the end game is run by the Black Widow Brigade, where they have a big moment that is focused on them bamboozling a man. And it's not just a moment that happens. You know, Eric Reichenbach is brought back out every couple of seasons for a preview talking about how stupid he was in that moment, right? This is a moment the show really, I think, puts a lot of emphasis on and really highlights as some of the more exciting moments that they've had at any point. You know, when I was going back and watching old seasons for the first time, I really, really enjoyed Amber Burkich in Australia as this, sidekick to Jerry Manthe. But when she comes back in All Stars and she wins that season, I really enjoyed seeing her kind of, in my eyes, come into her own more and be someone who is a much larger character and someone who sees success in the show. And I'm sure for a lot of people, seeing Parvati start as someone who is depicted as just the flirt. I'm going back to the question, right? Being just the flirt and coming back and winning. And she is tied to all of the successes of the Black Widow Brigade for years looking back. And, you know, it's also easy to probably forget at times the contributions that people like Suri made that result in her success as well.
Yep.
Speaking of Micronesia, Inside Survivor interviewed Eric Reichenbach right before season 40 about what his then thoughts were about Micronesia Parvati. You know, seeing her, you know, he's a fan of the show. He's one of the biggest fans. Like, he's like geeking out about Aussie. What was his thoughts about Parvati? Any predictions of what you think he's going to say? Do you think he was enamored, excited? Did he know who she was? Mari, what do you think?
Probably. I would think he probably didn't know Well, he did like Oz. I don't think he remembered her.
Okay.
What do you think, Matt?
You know what? Okay, so I don't remember Parvati making any comments about him being a fan or having a like I feel like that would have come up. So
Right.
maybe I going a little separate from Mari, I want to say, he thought her name was Poverty. That was about it.
So in Eric's interview, he mentions that I honestly thought of Parvati as a non-player / non-entity. This wasn't to
Mhm.
Parvati's discredit, though. As a 21-year-old kid that grew up watching Survivor and seeing Cook Islands right before applying, I just didn't put Parvati on the same level as contestants I considered physical challenge beasts or strategic masterminds. I had a very narrow view of what it takes to play Survivor and considered Parvati's treatment and edit in Cook Islands as a distraction from the rest of the players that were actually playing the game. So
Interesting.
I think that is really interesting when you kind of reflect about how, this is so different than the legend that we know Parvati as, right? I think quite often we are filling in the blanks. And I think Parvati certainly has a lot of just natural aptitude to do well in Survivor. But that was, the thoughts of like one of her peers essentially going into Micronesia.
But honestly, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of goes back to something I was saying earlier that I think, and again, I make the Sarah Lucina comparison because I just feel like when you have a first season that does not paint you as a threat, and people watch that season, so they think that they know you and what you have to bring, it's so much easier to slip under the radar. But the moment that Parvati establishes herself as a threat, it makes her that much less of a threat. And I mean, it is impressive that she made it as far as she did for Heroes versus Villains, but also, I mean, there are questions about her social game in that, and maybe people were okay with her making it far, realizing she won already. We're not going to vote for her again. She played a maybe not great social game. We're not going to vote for her. But it's like, and my conclusion with that is that it's so much easier to do well your second time around when the producers kind of sell you short the first time around.
I agree.
I think you're completely right, Matt. Look at, again, Amber in All Stars, Kelly Wentworth in Cambodia. If you were coming into a returnee season with a lower profile, like Parvati did in Micro, I think you have a lot more potential to make what you will of your opportunity there, because people are not going to be coming after you in the same way.
Yes. And the other historic thing I wanted to mention was that there was a book I had checked out at the library in grad school called Tribal Warfare, Survivor and the Political Unconscious of Reality Television. So it's essentially a book that kind of discusses like the literature on reality television at the time. It's very academic, if you will. And they surveyed Survivor fans in 2006. So it was only the first 10 seasons. So Parvati was not included in this. But I think it does give a bit more of a window about how the fan base was at that time.
Right.
And in this, it had each of them kind of fans rated a bunch of the contestants, right? The number one person at that time, Colleen Haskell.
Shout out.
The lowest ranked person, Austin Taylor, right? So this would tell you a lot about how the fans were kind of seeing the show after 10 seasons, anti-quitter. And the female contestants that tend to like were going to be very much good girls, good people. It was going to be your Colleens, your Elizabeths, Kathy, even Gretchen from Borneo is ranked very, very high. I mean, these were people who were just, I think at that time, we took people very literally. We were not having ironic fans yet. We were not standing people for the memes and the moments. We wanted good people because reality television was supposed to be about those things. And so in this data, they showed which contestants tended to be significantly highly rated by men compared to women. So what was statistically significant, which means unlikely due to chance, that gender played a role in a fan's perception of them. And what I noticed here was that those that were significantly rated higher by men and significantly lower by women were usually two camps of people. Either they were attractive and strategic women, i.e. Eliza, Heidi, Jenna, Jerry, Kelly Goldsmith, Kim Powers, or Sarah, aka Cleopatra. So women who were, I think, maybe more in charge of their sexuality or of their like destination in the game and very active, especially as young women. And the other one where the two men here were Ted from Thailand and Fairplay from Pearl Islands, who both I think were, maybe women had more issues with them as characters where men tended to give them a pass. Nigel, do you have any reactions to this?
I don't think I find this surprising exactly. More generally, I think it's very likely that people were taking the edit literally as it was given
Mhm.
to them. Just, hearing the music cues and understanding, oh, yeah, I probably am supposed to like this person or not
Right.
like this
Yeah.
person. And the longer that we spend with reality TV and understand the edit, I think that people start to maybe diverge away from how we're quote supposed to feel about characters. I think if you look at shows like RuPaul's Drag Race today, all of those
Mhm.
contestants are so aware of everything meta about the show, how
Yeah.
the edit
Mhm.
plays into things. I think that if you look at the people who go on to Survivor today, they are far more understanding of what that experience is going to be than people from early on, not just because they've seen a couple seasons, but I think because we all understand reality television.
Right.
I think
Mhm.
now we all say, oh, yeah, we know that that's fake. That's not real. It's all
Mhm.
produced. But for the first couple of seasons, I think people were like, this is a documentary, not realizing, how much of the edit can play
Yeah.
into that.
Michael
Mhm.
Scoopin's hands are falling off. Like this is real. This is not a joke. And I
Deserved
think
it.
it's actually interesting because when you think about where Parvati's legacy, like her timing in the show, also in how the reality television was changing, because I think she actually kind of comes around like the quote trashy era of reality television is starting to emerge, where people are starting to kind of have guilty pleasures in reality television contestants. VH1
Mhm.
is becoming very
VH1.
popular,
Yeah.
Flavor of love.
and what I would have done for Parvati be on I Love Money, like,
Yeah.
it's very interesting. But I think maybe the question I want to ask the panel today is, if being this kind of more femme fatale, Jerry was not very popular either, by the way, for those who
No.
do not know, was very different than how fans felt about it. Why would producers take such a chance on someone who is like such a like a vixen? Why would they kind of make this archetype they seemingly really want to see in more of their female contestants when women like that were not particularly that popular? I don't know if anyone has any immediate thoughts to that.
I mean, I do. And it's that the producers and a lot of I mean, and I get like Lynn Spillman behind the scenes of Survivor is someone who's iconic for being involved in the casting process. With that said, I feel like they kind of did what they wanted at the time. They got the peanut butter and the Oreos for Jenna and Heidi when they need to get the peanut butter and Oreos.
Exactly.
And I just feel
Mhm.
like in settings like that maybe are more male dominated, I'm not surprised that they're thinking, oh, I really like that Parvati. And the other thing I think that's
Mhm.
interesting in the context of all of this is like, we don't know what Parvati's interactions with production were like, but I would imagine that she was just as charming with, I'm not saying any hot tubs were involved, but she was
Mhm.
just as charming, like with everyone else around her. And so I also feel like that's a factor. Like if she's easy to work with, if she's trying to give good TV, if she's
Mhm.
like attractive and someone that people gravitate to some extent, like sure, keep her around. I also wonder, how much she was on the line potentially. Like, was she definitely going to be around for Micronesia, or were there certain people who said no and Parvati got the spot? So many questions, but I do feel like it comes back to like men just doing things that men like to do. But that's just my theory.
Yeah, I think you make some good points. Mari, do you feel like you're on the same wavelength as Matt here?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, she's a very pretty woman who it brings that, the sex sells type of vibe to it. So I'm not surprised that she was asked back. And she gave good content, she gave good buzz. And they really wanted to give some of those people on the Railroad Tribe a second chance.
Yeah, I mean, I'll also just say, like, definitely in the context of what Survivor was at the time, I think that Parvati is someone who I could just imagine being like an interesting player. We've gotten so many different players. I'm not going to name anyone by name, but like sometimes and oftentimes actually, it's been like women who are kind of cast there, but like sometimes don't seem like they want to be there, or maybe don't have all of the pieces to be really effective players.
Mm.
I believe that Parvati had all of those pieces from the beginning, even though that wasn't highlighted all that much. And so she, I mean, like if we were to look at all of the women who, or all the women as characters, I should say, feature around that time, I do feel like she gives something a little bit different. A little bit of snark, a little bit of humor, a little bit of, is that kosher? You know, like even that one line jumps out to us. I remember that from that first season that she played in too, and so with Cook Islands. And so I just feel like Parvati maybe deserves a little bit more credit just for what she was at that time. And we can't go back to that time to experience the context, but I think she kind of was giving a little bit more than some other Survivor players they're casting at the time. She had potential.
I do not talk about Becky like that, Matt. She also was a great contestant who did not choose to take her clothes off. And if anything, Survivor seems to really like making people who took their clothes off come back. That feels like it's a common trend, actually, between
Jenna
Maraska, Richard Hatch, Max Dawson was on the ballot for a second chance. I mean,
Shireen comes back.
Sure, it's like they actually, if you take your clothes off, and I don't think it's nearly as kosher as Parvati would say today. I think there was a time where that was really a selling point in production's eyes.
Yeah, and I think it's also probably helpful to remember that at the end of the day, this is a TV show and production is interested in keeping everything feeling fresh. That's why I think we're probably seeing so many twists in the modern era, right? But I think that also applies to casting archetypes. I think there are some archetypes that we're familiar with that were more popular at some time in the show, less in others. I think the sweetheart young ingenue type is someone that was more common early on in the show than later. I think an example of someone is Amber. She is a very quiet person in her first outing, comes back, has, this quote whirlwind showmance with Boston Rob, ends up winning, and they are massive stars in CBS reality TV. They play multiple times on The Amazing Race. CBS pays for their wedding. I think that for them, Amber was probably like the ultimate love story with Boston Rob. Boston Rob has a lot of story outside of that relationship with Amber, but so much of Amber's story is about being in that relationship with Boston Rob. And I'm sure that they were saying like, okay, we've had our sweetheart love interest person. Let's have something different. And I think that Parvati was able to be edgy, really, I think, exciting and confessional. And I think that's something we haven't actually talked a lot about so far, is that in doing some rewatch to prepare for today, I think that I was really reminded how charismatic Parvati is. I think we often think about her strategy, her gameplay, and I think we can almost forget that she is, I think, a top tier narrator in the show, because there's just something about the way that she speaks that I think is really, really captivating.
Yeah. It's like she's almost speaking directly to us. I mean, I imagine the producer that's with her, she's making them laugh. She's making them like lean in more. And she's just, and that really just feels so, palpable. I think we need to start transitioning to evaluating Parvati's legacy, and what that really means. And so I think maybe we should all kind of discuss again about, some of the points that we've covered already.
So I think a question that I have for the panel here is, we're trying to decide, is Parvati just the flirt, quote unquote? We've talked a lot about Cook Islands, looking at micro heroes versus villains and winners at war. Do you think that it's fair to consider Parvati the flirt when looking at those other outings? Think of the people that she aligns herself with. Who are the people that she betrays or chooses not to betray? Do we think that a flirt is a way that you would describe her in her other iterations as well?
Well, I think Natalie Bolton would say so. I think, and also underrated, most iconic, maybe Parvati moment. That's when I was like Eliza having the reaction with the jaw dropping. Well, my mom definitely is not going to be happy about this. Like she is like flirting with a queer woman on television. It was, very radical. But I think I'm definitely seeing some of that that's still occurring. You mentioned the Boston Rob flirting of it all in Winners at War. Matt, Mari, what do you think?
I'm going to say yes. Let's say she's just the flirt, because it's not bad to be the flirt. That is what I'm changing the perception of here. It's not bad to be the flirt. Like, it's not like upsetting for a woman to like use her sexuality, her gift to like be able to pull people towards her and to pull them in her direction. There was nothing that she did on any of those islands that was untoward or unfair. You know anything, you know what I'm saying? Like it's using your skills. And I feel like in these type of shows, Big Brother, Survivor, often the things seen as the winning strategy are strategies that usually lean heavily towards strategies that men can win with. Like we talked about a few years ago how they were breaking down how like men found the most idols and how pulling idols out of bags and stuff can hand a man an easy win as
Yeah.
opposed to a woman who ran the whole season. You know what I'm saying? Like looking at you, Triple H, Survivor heroes, hustlers, and whatever. But you know what I'm saying? Like I don't think it's fair that women can't use, almost like they can't use their femininity to win. My thought process is I hate to say this, on the other side of Big Brother, like Nicole Franzel, like how she is not the best representation of winners. People feel like that's what they call her because she quote unquote used her flirting, her body, to get to the end and stuff like that. It's just like, for me, it always feels like a two-way street for women, and women should be able to win as a strategic mastermind. They should be able to win as a physical threat, or they should be able to win being able to socially make bonds with people. Again, our Parvatis or our Michelle Fitzgeralds. You know what I'm saying? Like, why does it seem like when a woman winner is devalued, it always has to come down to like she relied on her social game? And I just don't find that fair. So I'm gonna say yes because we're gonna flip it. We're gonna take it back. It's okay to be the flirt and win by flirting.
Yeah,
I
and you
think
know what?
great
I'm gonna
points.
call it. No, I'm calling this out. I completely respect that, Mari. And while I do agree with you, I also think to myself, why I gotta be a flirt? Why should I be a flirt? The flirt, like, what's that all about? Like, why is it that when a woman has a really good ability to read and bond with people, and sure, she's attractive and has sex appeal, does she need to be the flirt? And in my mind, Parvati's not the flirt. She has a lot of these factors that we would associate with someone who could be considered as more of a seductress, for example. But I also think that going even back to Cook Islands, that a lot of just her looks and what you see on the outside and her tone of voice and all these things kind of cloak the fact that she's like an incredible empath and she has great reads. I just wouldn't simplify her to being a flirt. I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with that, but I also realize that if she were a man, that we would like which men are we calling flirts? Are we calling Ozzy a flirt?
Mhm.
Like, what is it? Because I haven't heard that yet. And so I refuse to call Parvati a flirt or the flirt or simply the flirt, just because there's so much more that she brings. And I do feel like that perception of her, or at least as far as that word is defined, is pretty like reductionist. Like, there's a lot more that she's able to bring to the table. So
I
no, I don't think she's just the flirt.
I love that, Matt. I think it was a great, a thing to mention. I don't think male players are called flirts at all. I mean, what is
Mhm.
the closest thing to I think men are more likely to be called charming, right? Like
Right.
JT, he's charming them. If Parvati's flirting with Natalie, what is JT doing with Coach? Like what is
Mhm.
Mhm.
to me? It's like you're seeing what people want from you. You're doing that back. You make people want to be around you, enjoy your presence.
Mhm.
And I what I was drawn to was your comments, Mari, about it being a very two-way street. And I think
Yeah.
I drew an immediate parallel to a lot of women who are in high-ranking positions, whether that be in politics or
Mhm.
in like private industry. And a lot of there's always a rumor like, oh, she slept her way to the top, or
Yeah.
she only got it
Yeah.
because of her looks. It is, I think, naturally reductionist, and I kind of like the idea of reclaiming the flirt because there's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with being the flirt.
Right.
Mhm.
What I want to ask, everyone here though is, Parvati, was labeled the flirt, became exceptionally popular as time had gone on. Why did why was that? Why did we move towards that? Like, what was the real like push that made us start loving the flirt and respecting the flirt at a point, even if there were still some vocal detractors?
And I also think it's interesting because Parvati is the winner of Micronesia. She, looking at the game, she is on the favorites tribe and is able to essentially take control because you have a group of 5 that comes together with 2 showmances. And who is the other woman in a showmance in that group? It's Amanda. And she goes up in the end at final 2 against Amanda. But we don't talk about Amanda being the flirt, right? Like we have a lot of different things that we talk about or think about Amanda, I think through like a lens, but I don't think a flirt is how we talk about Amanda. So I think it's interesting that is how we frame Parvati. And so I question, is it because she was into showmance? I don't think that's like exactly the answer. Is it the way that she talked to the men? I don't think it's exactly the answer. Is it just her looks? I don't think it's exactly the answer.
I think it's,
look at Amanda.
I think Amanda is the Amber in this situation, though. I think, there's actually this really incredible dichotomy. And that's what I love about the Black Widow Brigade, is that there's all these different types of women, right? Like different types of women who play Survivor differently, but they all play together. And there's different ways to dissect that. And I think Amanda is more of the Amber, the classic good girl. She's more passive. Like her crush approaches her. That feels different than Parvati, who is talking about confessionals about wanting to, employ a strategy. Like to flirt as a strategy felt disingenuous. And I think when we see in the backlash of flirting, because I think in the teen era, we're starting to become very pro flirting, right? But in like later, like we see this huge backlash against it. Like I think Amber Borzotra in BB16, like women who are or being put in that role are seen as leading men on, and that is a problem. And so I think it's interesting to kind of think about it in those ways. But I do think Amanda is presented as almost the antithesis of Parvati, despite being in lockstep with her almost on every single vote, except the one with her showmance. She does not vote her showmance off where Parvati would have, and I think that again makes why Amanda was a little bit more popular with the audience. Matt, Mari, do you feel like there are any differences between Parvati and Amanda we should be exploring here and how the fans were reacting to them?
I mean, let me just give you this, like looking across. So we could talk about Micronesia itself, but I think the beauty is we have the benefit of all of these seasons to look at Parvati. And Parvati in Heroes versus Villains in particular, but also in Winners at War, she's just so snarky and like so quick, and she's this mastermind. Some might say a mean girl, but she has lots of like biting comments, and she just speaks the truth. And I think that's actually one of the things that endears her to so many people. Like even if it doesn't work that well for those out in the islands, I think part of what people love is just how candid she is. Amanda, I wouldn't give Amanda all of that, and I would say she was a little bit more robotic in a sense, or definitely more robotic than Parvati. And so there's definitely even just something seeing them standing next to each other and confessional to confessional, like, okay, Amanda comes off as a little bit more sincere and genuine. She's not going to cut people down, she's not going to vote out her showmance. Parvati's going to do what she needs to do to win, and in my opinion that should be respected in the game. But Mari, and how do you feel about the Amanda Parvati dynamic, and did you see the differences or similarities there?
I mean, it's funny to talk about them as a duo, only because like Parvati does get awarded the win, even though she's the cutthroat one who would have cut her showmance. Amanda's the one who at least perceived or projected towards the viewers is like she had genuine feelings for Ozzy, and that's what it felt like. And we almost got a weird proposal. I don't know what was during that final tribal council. So I mean, the projection of her being a good girl, but then the jury not voting for her is very interesting. And I think as we go along, as you guys are saying, like what was kind of the change point, I think what the changing point is because fans get more nuance when there's more content to be able to research and break down like this. And I think the nuances we see is that not only is she a flirt, but she felt way more strategic, and knowing who she needed to cut to win, it garners more respect the further down we go as we see more seasons. It makes me think of like Kim Spradlin's win, and how Kim was she was the mastermind of the season and she was quickly awarded, while at the same time, who was it? The not Sabrina, but the other one who sat with her. Everybody was like digging into
Chelsea.
her. Chelsea,
Mm.
yes. Everybody hated her because they felt like they were friends with her, but she was like playing them, like as opposed to Kim, who was like really outspoken about like, no, I'll do anything to win.
Yeah.
And people being okay with you being upfront saying I'll do anything to win, as opposed to people thinking that you're your friend and you're not going to cut them, and you tell them you're not going to cut them and then you cut them.
Yeah.
So I just think what it is, it's the passage of time, seeing the more seasons go through and seeing, the audience flipping and being smarter and being more meta, and seeing that no, we actually want our winners to be cutthroat and to make strategic moves, as opposed to just be handed something.
I think you both raise really, really great points. I think I'm more confident now to say that I think that Parvati was almost a little bit ahead of her time in Cook Islands, because I
Mhm.
think that, as the years went on, our society became more and more accepting of women being, I think, so forward and so
Mhm.
self-confident. Whereas I think previously we expected women to be a little bit more agreeable at times. And I
Yeah.
Mhm.
think that, look at Parvati and Amanda, right? Matt, you were mentioning that Parvati will be a little more, not always like the nicest or the most quote kosher thing to say.
Yeah.
And Amanda has a background in pageants, right? Amanda knows how to
Mm.
give a good answer that sounds good.
So you would think.
And yeah, and maybe you think about it and you're like, I don't really know what she's actually saying, or she's not being as real with you. And I think that
Yeah.
Parvati is real. And I think that that's
Yeah.
also what really endears her to the audience as she gets more airtime as her seasons go on. Because I haven't seen the confessional charts, but I'm sure that her airtime just continues to go up every time that she talks to the camera in a way that is very honest. And you feel like you really know exactly what she's saying. And even if you don't always agree with her viewpoint, she's just, I think, so fun in how she delivers a lot of her confessionals that I think she just won us over. What do
Yeah.
you think, Kevin?
I think she won us
Mhm.
over. She definitely won me over.
Mhm.
And I think, it's so interesting because I will say that Parvati is not just the flirt, even though I don't think there's anything wrong with being a flirt. I'll even flip my position from
Yeah.
the beginning, because I think Parvati passes the Bechdel test. I think Parvati,
Mhm.
is not, and even though I think maybe her highlight reel quite often is about her relationships with men or even relationships with women and the way that she's thinking about those things, but generally, she has so many layers to her. I think we should appreciate all of that. And I think to kind of touch on this discussion topic a bit more is that I think we see this shift in the show because Micronesia is really considered this really kind of turning point, and Parvati is clearly a huge part of that.
Right.
Is Natalie White being so dismissed by the fan base? I think tells you a lot about how Survivor maybe had shifted a bit since Micronesia, because Natalie White has a lot more in common, I think, archetype wise, to Amanda and Amber. They were kind of more loyal, nice, agreeable, not causing a fuss. And Russell really modeled a lot of his game off Parvati in Micronesia, and he loses. And that was, he had this huge uproar about Russell losing, and he won fan favorite twice actually after that. So I think there is something about how at a certain point we saw strategically assertive women and were really excited by that and wanted to see more, or at least a vocal part of the fan base did. I think really started taking over a lot of the super fan space. And I think it's great to know that Parvati got to be that person. I think I question, maybe as a final thing to like chew on here is, Parvati's talking about such a unique figure, but if she wasn't the first person to use flirting as a strategy, and she isn't the first young, strategically aggressive female contestant, and she's like, then what is making her so unique? Is it kind of the things all coming together? I don't know if you kind of want to all go around and maybe share some final thoughts on Parvati or answer that question.
I think that the magic of Parvati is all of the different things that come together. I think, each of her outings from Cook Islands through Heroes versus Villains are really building off her previous iteration, because you get to see her grow as a strategist, as a player, in her effectiveness. She wins micro, but she is, I think, the most exciting in heroes versus villains. She gets a lot of big moments. So I think that the magic of Parvati is just she kept getting better, and she is charismatic as all heck.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would just like even jump in. I love that, and I agree. Like it's the it's the she just brings so much. Like she's Parvati's like a gumbo, like a nice gumbo. You throw in all sorts of vegetables and other things. I don't know how to make a gumbo, but that's what Parvati is. She brings it all to the table, and I mean, I think that what you point out, Kevin, in terms of like if it's not the sex appeal, and if it's not like any one thing, what is it? It's the combination of things. And the thing that I think that I appreciate most about Parvati as a character, and maybe this speaks to her legacy, is that like she does keep evolving. Like she feels like a person who we could know, and she is like giving to the cameras in a way where it's not just watching her and her interactions, but it's like she's bringing us along the journey. And I think a lot of characters that we see, we're watching them. With Parvati, we're going with her on this really fascinating journey. I mean, arguably, I would say, we didn't get to see a ton of it, but one of the most fascinating parts of that was Winners at War. 10 years down the line, she shows up kind of ready to burn shit down. Being a mom and showing up 10 months after giving birth, like Parvati could do it all. And I think paints this perfect picture that like a woman does not need to fall into just this one box, which we should have already known. But I think through Parvati, we've kind of seen that that come to life, and actually through a lot of great female characters, so I hope are highlighted on this series.
Yeah.
But Mari, what do you think?
You're muted, Mari.
My bad. Yeah, I think we've all pretty much said it. I think Parvati, her lasting legacy on the show it cannot be like understated. I sincerely believe, like what I said at the beginning, that there are a lot of women who probably had the potential to win the game sniped out just because of a comparison to her. Like
Totally.
honestly. So when you have that big of an impact on an ever evolving game, like that is just a legend. That is a legacy that will remain. So be it a flirt, a social player, or a strategist, however you want, whatever you want to call her, depending on what era you were introduced to her. I think at the end of the day, you call her a legend, you call her mother. She is it. She did it, and she is a really great player.
Yeah.
Mari, I think you make a really, really great point because, going back to the Twitter feud I mentioned earlier between her and Sandra, Sandra is one of the other massive legends of the show, but
Mhm.
you don't really hear people saying like, oh, we need to get rid of so-and-so. She might be the next Sandra. It is not a
Mhm.
gameplay that I think
Right.
people fear in the way that they fear what could be a Parvati, whatever that means.
Yeah.
But sorry, let me just interject.
Please.
But also, it could be seen that not many people can replicate what Sandra did. I
Yes.
I think that would be more it because there's only the queen stays queen. That
Yeah, I
one.
mean,
There's
and
only one Sandra.
well, I
So
would say, and while Parvati is a queen, we could have two
yes,
queens
there's
in
yeah.
the royal family. It's all great. We hope that they'll coexist. But I think the thing
Yes.
that's interesting, like with Sandra's, it's just harder to reduce Sandra's game. Like, what are you going to reduce that to? You could reduce Sari to like the woman who came off the couch because that's the branding that they gave her. You could reduce Parvati to the flirt because that's the branding that they've often given her. Sandra, not as simple to reduce. And I think Sandra's also really interesting as a two-time winner uh, who has her own sit-out bench, and that's just not typical. And I think that, Sandra's also another one who I think deserves her own consideration in all of this. But I think that they're both incredible queens, royalty, mother. as
Yeah.
Marty said.
Yes.
And you know, just to kind of wrap on these final thoughts before we promote any social media, is I wanted to quickly say that I think Sandra and Parvati, great dichotomy for one another. We talked about Parvati versus
Yeah.
Amanda. I think Parvati versus Sandra, because Sandra does not employ flirting as part of her strategy. That is not something we describe her. She is, you know, a mother in particular in Heroes versus Villains. She is
Not the same kind as mother.
Yes.
and the way that she connects with men is very differently as well. And so I think that is also in the eyes of the jury. You know, Candace says to Parvati that like her gameplay, you know, is reminiscent of a spouse in a bad abusive relationship, that like Parvati is literally tied to men in the eyes of someone who actually was on the white tribe to begin with her, if you can imagine. So I mean, that's so interesting about how that affects the people there and how we also participate in that discourse. I think at the end of the day, Parvati's great. I think she gives hope to actors and actresses and recruits everywhere. You know, she definitely came in an era where we were recruiting a lot of people and she had not had a lot of familiarity with the show, and then proved to be a real legend. I love that. I think she's successful as a character because she is playful, she's fun, she revels in her villainy and the joy of it all. She's aware of like when these moments are fun as an audience member and takes that with us, which I love. I think Parvati maybe is even underrated as someone who cares about things like loyalty. You know, when she's a juror 2 times, she does not vote for the strategic mastermind of the season. She votes for Ozzy. She votes for Natalie Anderson. She votes for people that she really seems to probably connect with more. She's about the vibes rather than the number strategy. And, you know, we mentioned earlier about a trend in her showmance partners. I would also like to mention that a trend of actually being a POC supporter in general, which is crazy considering that she's from the Cook Island season of it all.
That's why she was like a little skeeved out about the twist from the very get-go, right?
Both times as
we love
a
that about
juror,
her.
she votes for a person of color, and in Heroes versus Villains, she says that she would have voted for Sandra, you know, when Russell confronts her on day 39, another person of color. And I just think Parvati has a lot of dimensions to her, and we should be thinking about all of those parts of Parvati when we talk about this like really gigantic Survivor legend. So this has been fun.
Yeah.
Matt, Mari, thank you both so much for joining us on this lovely journey all about Parvati today. What do you have coming up to share with folks?
Yeah, Mari, what do you have coming up to share with folks?
So I guess I'll plug for me and Matt, the Wrestling RHAP Up. We are back. So definitely we've been on a break, we've been on hiatus. So please go subscribe. If you're listening, go to subscribe to our direct feed at robhasawebsite.com/wrestling feed. Like, give us a follow, like we need it. And you can listen to us talk about the highlights of the week in wrestling. And you don't even have to watch wrestling. Just listen to us. We'll have fun guests. It's so fun. If you're a big fan of me and Matt, please go check it out. And this is the best time to do it because we are on the road to WrestleMania right now. This is the hottest time in the wrestling world. Big returns, big debuts. Like it's going down. So definitely go and check us out. And of course, every Tuesday, I bring True Crime Tuesdays to RHAP, me and Sarah Carradine, on the crime scene RHAP Up. So this week, me and Sarah will be visited with Chappelle will be on with us, and we will be talking about the hatchet wielding hitchhiker on Netflix. So definitely go check that out. Yes, go to robhasawebsite.com/crime feed. Again, please subscribe, support. That's the best way to support all of us as content creators. Go and subscribe to our individual feeds, and you know we tell you if it's worth watching. Then you can also follow me on Twitter at Mari Talks Too Much. That's 2 like the number 2. Yeah. You can follow Crime Scene at Crime Scene RHAP on Twitter, and you can follow at Wrestling RHAP Up on Twitter. So go follow.
Damn, look at that. Look at Mari doing most of my plugs right there. Because I was going to mostly just plug Mari at Mari Talks Too Much too, like the number 2. Mari, put up the 2s for the people who are watching the video version. If they're not watching, they're missing out. But beyond the Wrestling RHAP Up, which is very fun. And, you know, Mari and I get to dive in and not only talk about what's happening on the screen, but what's happening behind the scenes, which is definitely more interesting than what happens on the screen, and we love to dive into that. You could also find me on Pod Friends, a new season of Pod Friends as of this recording dropping just came out, featuring the season 3 premiere with the one and only Survivor 42 winner, Marianne
Mhm.
O'Ketch, talking with her about her life, about things that are not Survivor. We mentioned Survivor
Yay.
here and there, but there's just so much. And love Marianne. She's phenomenal. And if you love Survivor, I'll just give a preview that next week's episode features the one and only Mike Bloom, who covers Survivor with Parade. And we had a beautiful conversation that's already been recorded that I can't wait for everyone to check out. And like Mari said, subscribing is probably the best thing that you could do to support. So go to robhasawebsite.com/podfriendsfeed. Subscribe. Leave
Mhm.
those reviews, show some love, but make sure you subscribe and follow Podfriends at Hey Podfriends on social media. And I'll just plug myself. Follow me, Matt Scott GW. GW like good winner. That's what you can remember. So Matt Scott GW. Yeah, stay up to date with what I'm up to. Kevin, Nigel, where can the people find you? I can't even say it.
Well, you can find me at Asian Narc on Twitter, which is short for my Instagram handle at Asian Narcissist. Quickly, I want to say that definitely support Pod Friends if you're listening to this. Nigel and I did Pod Friends a while ago, and if you want to know about how that relationship works, that will be a treat for you as well, where we talk about how we met during the Ghost Island finale. So, upcoming on You Thought You Knew, our next episode, maybe people would not call her mother, but I secretly do. We'll be doing You Thought You Knew Susie Smith of Survivor Gabon. We'll be answering the question, was Susie robbed? If you want to be part of that conversation, make sure to use the hashtag YTYK for You Thought You Knew. Nigel, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Nigel Speed. Thank you for joining us today, everybody. We hope you've enjoyed this lovely journey, and we hope to see you again next time.
Thank you.